Hi, my name is Jonathan Roth. This is Geopolitical Futures Video. I'm joined here by Allison Fedirka. She's a senior analyst at GPF. Allison, thank you so much for joining me.
My pleasure.
So I want to talk to you about what's happening in India. There have been a lot of economic reforms that I think from the Western point of view, we maybe have one perspective as to what's going on, but there's a pretty big backstory here that not a lot of people understand. Why don't you unpack this for me?
So the start of this particular economic reform that we're going to put together here is actually comes from about a year ago when Prime Minister Modi of India decided to demonetize 86% of the country's currency.
So first, why don't you, for the viewers, what did this look like?
It was a very surprise move. It was one that was planned but kept under locks. And basically the public went to bed one night, woke up the next day and was told, within the next time frame, you have X number of days to exchange all of your currency at a bank and show proof of earnings with your tax documents or employment. And if you fail to do it within this time period, we are no longer honoring those currency notes.
So this was a big surprise.
This was a big surprise. It affected a very large portion of the population. It took out a large portion of the cash that was in circulation, and it did create cash shortages, not only because people no longer had the currency, but the printing of the new notes was long delayed afterwards, in part for logistical reasons, and in part also to allow time to clean up all of the old notes before introducing any of the new notes in.
Now, fast forwarding to these economic reforms, these new ones. Walk me through.
Okay, so the latest step is twofold. But the big picture here, the goal of all of this, is to try and formalize India's economy and to bring it up to international standards. One of the things that India would like to see happen more is more international business, more foreign investment, and it's very difficult to bring that or attract that to your country if you don't meet international standards, especially nowadays. So these are all steps aimed at trying to elevate both the income and the economic activity of the people in India, as well as the business standards and regulations so that they can attract more outside business. The demonetization was one way to help get rid of a lot of the black market, which circulated a lot of currency, some of it counterfeit, some of it legal, illegally learned, all that stuff that goes into a black market. The next step that this laid down was two things. One, you had to have a bank account to help do some of these things. So it forced a lot of the people to register their IDs, register their income, and get bank accounts or do things administratively that ordinarily they could function in society without doing. Now all of a sudden you had a whole bunch of people paying income tax that never had to pay income tax before because they weren't registered. You had a bunch of people who needed to get formal paperwork from their jobs to try to be able to comply with this, people who would update their electronic IDs so that they could comply with this, and it forced a large portion of the population, I won't say all of it, obviously there's over 1 billion people in India, and a lot of them live in poverty, so it did not affect everybody equally. But it forced a lot of them to take those steps towards being more formalized. And that was the individual level. On the business level, it also forced companies to turn in a lot of financial information as well. And this opened the gates to a couple of the reforms that we're seeing now. The more particular one is the crackdown on real estate and the crackdown on shell companies in India. And that's the step 2 of this larger process that was first laid down with the demonetization last year.
Okay, so this crackdown on real estate and shell companies, this smells like corruption to me.
It is. You can call it however you want, but outsiders would definitely call it corruption. So shell companies in India are not the same as we sometimes think about them in the United States or Europe, but they're essentially entities that are helpful for illicit financial activities or fraud or tax evasion and things like that. The same is true in the real estate sector, where you can get titles in other people's names, get properties that don't necessarily belong to you, There were instances where they had, 400 companies registered on one floor of a building.
That's pretty ingenious.
Yes. So a lot of these companies just either don't exist or there are ways of trying to funnel their finances. And this is also true not only of business, but of very wealthy individuals. And again, also forcing the companies involved in the real estate sector as well. And then also you have the larger corporations that set up these shell companies in the first place. And so now, because of all the tax information and individual income information that they were able to kind of drive into the system from the previous measures, they are now able to identify who some of these shell companies are, where they're located, what major corporations are involved with these shell companies, and now they know how to start tackling those issues.
Look, I think India has a perception of being one of the most corrupt nations on earth. Has Modi paid any sort of political price for engineering and pushing these reforms out there?
So right now, his political party is still the strongest party in India. And leading up to this, the reason he was able to do all of these reforms in the first place is that he did enjoy a lot of popular support. There were local elections, I want to say in March of last year, but essentially about 6 or 8 months leading up to the first major reform of the demonetization, his party performed very strongly in several local elections. And that, in some ways, gave him a bit of a political mandate to move forward with these. The concern now is that the opposition parties, like the Congress Party, they're not in a position to compete with him or his party. At the same time, as people start to have issues with their own personal finances or see a little bit of slower economic growth as companies and individuals adjust to the changes and reallocating their resources and finances, that does weigh down on him. So this could lead the way for him to suffer popular support. It has not happened to a degree that challenges his rule in any way right now. But come the next local elections, before all of these moves were made, it was pretty much a given that he was going to be the be-all, end-all. He could do no wrong. In 2019, he was going to win, or his party was, or whoever he wanted to succeed him. And now people are much more hesitant about giving him that clear mandate of control.
Okay. What's the next shoe to drop in this? There must be more plans coming.
There's more plans coming. So once they can, there's two things that I think will be very soon to follow, or at least are in the works right now. The first one is after filing with all of these shell companies and getting them cleaned up, getting them off the books, following through with some of these larger corporations and potentially either prosecuting or negotiating deals or putting regulations in place that get them to really make sure that they don't do this again and fully shut down everything. Parallel to this, there's also a new tax scheme that has come out to help simplify and streamline the tax system. And that is another measure that still is a big question mark. People are still learning how to file. People are still understanding how it works. So whether or not he can fully implement this, we're not sure yet. And then the next big thing would be the gold market in India. So India is one of the largest gold markets in the world. Mm-hmm. And they use a lot of it for jewelry. It's a very big deal for them. And the gold lobby was actually one of the few lobbies that was able to put pressure on the government to take down their tax bracket when this new tax system came into play. And the government wants to, again, regulate this and set up something similar to their own domestic stock exchange for gold. They've consulted with other countries about how they do that, including the UK. They've started to restrict some exports of gold over, I think it's 22 carats. So they're taking small moves on that, and this idea of regulating the gold sector has been in the works for at least the past, I would say, 10 months, if not more. And we still have not seen a definitive market or exchange come out, but bits and pieces of showing that this is still in the works. What the final product will look like, we're still not 100% sure, but that is something that tends to be underneath the radar that will eventually come to the surface in the future.
Well, Allison, great insights, and I guess we're going to be waiting to see what happens next. So thanks for your time.
Thank you very much for having me.